Okay, and we are live on the YouTubes. Wonderful, wonderful. Hi guys, thank you. We're gonna start in like 1 more minute. I'm just getting some other things set up here. Oh, okay. Thank you guys for joining. We have people watching on YouTube as well as here. For those who don't know, my name is Sean Bagbo. I am a rising second year med student, and I've been hosting the pre-med Zoom parties for the last couple of weeks now. And today we're going to be talking about making the most of your gap years. So this panel is really going to be focused on talking about gap years. We're also going to hear a bit about our panelist's journey to medicine as well. So let's get started.
Hello, everyone. I hope everybody can see me all right and hear me all right. Yeah, so my name is Adora Izike. I am an incoming medical student as well as a YouTuber. Funny enough, was also a non-trad, so I took a couple of gap years, and so that was why I was interested in moderating this particular session. I am on Shayun's team putting together the Zoom parties, so this won't be the last Zoom party you'll see me on. So I just want to give our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves. And so the first one on my screen here is Adrian, so you can go ahead.
Hello, I'm Adrian Davis. I went to Dominican University and I graduated of California, and I graduated back in 2019. I'm an incoming med student, and I took 2 years off before matriculating to school, and I was working at UCSF during that time.
Okay, the next person on my is Katie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie. I graduated from the University of Central Florida in 2017. I'm currently an incoming medical student as well. I took 4 gap years. During that time, I went back to school to raise my undergraduate science GPA, and I also work as a teacher.
And Olamide.
Hello, my name is Olamide. I graduated from Towson University in 2019, and I took 2 gap years where I worked as a medical assistant and also as a research program coordinator, and I'm also an incoming medical student. Happy to be here.
Great. Thank you all for coming, and thank you all for being able to be on this panel today. I just some housekeeping stuff for all the participants. Feel free to like chat in the chat room, but if you're asking questions, just so that we don't miss it, use the Q&A button so that we are able to keep track of your questions. And towards the end of the session, we're going to ask those questions as well, as much as we can. So the first question that we have though for our panelists is, how do you know, or how did you all know that you needed to take a gap year? Or like, how does one know? Is it something that you planned? Was it just like, oh, I'm here and it's been 2 years and now I want to apply to medical school? So how did you all go about deciding that? How did you realize that you needed to take a gap year? And this is for everybody.
I think for me, I was coming up on my last year at UCF. I hadn't taken the MCAT yet. I knew that my science GPA was not at all where I wanted it to be. So it was more for me a very strategic decision on my part. I kind of knew that I was going to be out of school for a minute because there were some things that I wanted to do before medical school, like purchase a car. I wanted to make sure that I had money to pay to go to UCF again as a non-degree seeking student, because you don't get financial aid for that. So I knew it was going to take me a few years, and I knew that I had to work in a job where I was going to make enough money to do that and continue on with, the journey to medicine and everything. But I think honestly, for everyone, it's a personal decision. It's going to be different for everyone. But for me, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to apply. So let me do some stuff to get myself ready for it.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I'll tackle that question next. So for me, it just ended up being that the way life aligned for me, I ended up having to take a couple of gap years. So I took the MCAT, I didn't do so hot. And then this was like close to me graduating. And then at the same time, my grandfather unexpectedly passed away. And so I had to give myself time just to properly grieve and everything. And so I knew that also because of my poor MCAT, that I needed to take a step back and really reevaluate how I studied. And it wasn't well at all the first time. So then I wanted to make sure I had a job that would help strengthen my skills. And so then I started looking at an academic research lab, and that's where I landed. And ultimately, life ended up giving me that pause because it was so necessary, because I could not imagine myself trying to have gone to school like after my grandfather passed, like right around my graduation. Like that would have just been too much. And I definitely wouldn't have done well in my first year. So I delayed that.
Yeah, I think like a common theme that is being said is that I feel like for me personally, I just wasn't ready. I discovered that I kind of wanted to go to this path a little bit later in my college career. It was like the end of my junior year. And when I went to my pre-med advisor, she kind of told me all the things that I needed. Like I needed to take the MCAT, I needed more clinical hours, maybe a little bit of research if that was possible. And I didn't want to fit all of that in my senior year of college because, it is your last year of college. So I wanted to make the best of it as opposed to being stressed out and trying to tackle all of these things. And I was also an athlete as well. So I didn't want to, I just didn't want to kill myself that last year. So I decided to just take that year or two and just really make sure that I was fully prepared to enter this journey. And I was definitely happy that I did that.
Thank you so much for that. So my next question is, did any of you take the MCAT during your gap year? And if so, because I think all of you mentioned that you at least like worked in some capacity, and I'm guessing probably full-time. Like how were you able to balance studying and working full-time or part-time if you did?
So for me, the first part of the question, yes, I did take the MCAT during my gap years. I actually took it twice. I was working full-time as a high school teacher. I think the first time I took it was my second gap year. And honestly, it was tough. At the time I was teaching. I was a student at UCF again, and I was a student at Valencia College, which is a community college, to get my credits for my professional teaching license. So I think I bit off way too much at that time. So my score was not that great. And so I did have to retake it, and I actually retook it during the pandemic. So it was a whole different ball game. Everything was digital. I knew that I was going to retake it and try and study that summer prior to applying. So I was not going to be working because that clearly didn't work out the first time. But it is a struggle. It does take discipline, time management, that kind of thing. But you can, it's definitely doable if you manage your time correctly, I would say.
Yeah, it is definitely, if you can just focus on taking the MCAT, definitely do that. But I definitely was not in that circumstance where I could. So I think that one thing with like managing your time is that because I was working full time, I had to study for a longer amount of time. Like I was studying for almost up to a year, as opposed to some people who don't work and they can just take it in like 6 weeks of studying, which is just crazy, but it happens and they get good scores. And also, like, I think that it helps to be open with whoever your managers are. Like for me, I was working 5 days a week, and sometimes it was like overtime, and it was just really killing me. So I just like went to my supervisor, took it to the side, and I was just like, hey, like, is there any way that I could maybe do 4 days a week, or maybe come in later in the day so I could study in the morning? And they were all very receptive to that. Like I was definitely scared going up to approach them, but you know, they should understand that, like, you know, you have like bigger dreams outside of your job. And if they don't, then you probably are at the wrong job.
I also had the same thing because I was working full time, and luckily I chose a position where we got to set our own schedule. So I was just very forthcoming with my supervisor and let him know that I would get work done really early in the morning. So, I mean, I was getting to work at like 7 a.m. at the latest, and then working till say 2, 3 o'clock. And then I could go home and study for the rest of the evening. But definitely I would consider looking for jobs that allow for that flexibility to study, and just having that upfront communication, like everyone has echoed so far, that will really help you in the long run.
Okay, thank you so much. So my next question is, what is one mistake that you've done or you see people do during their gap years? So like, what are some mistakes that folks do? And feel free.
I think I'd say the biggest mistake that I've seen a lot of pre-meds commit is being so afraid of taking gap years that they unintentionally extend out their time that they would take off because they're like in a rush to get their MCAT score. And you know, you're taking it like 3 times in a year, and then after you do that, the registration system literally will not let you register for that 4th exam until you've waited 365 calendar days to like make you reassess. So definitely, like, if you're not getting the score that you want, I would definitely recommend like slowing things down, because you will ultimately extend out your gap years if you're like not happy with your score, or you're getting scores that you can't apply with. So I'd say that's like the top one I've seen.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to go with like the MCAT answer too. I think that you should really try to take the MCAT at the start of your gap year if you can. Like I've seen people, you know, they're like 1 year into their gap year and like they're working, getting these experiences and stuff. And I'm like, oh, like how'd your MCAT go? And they just like haven't even tackled that yet. And I feel like the longer you wait, the more defeated you become in like studying. So, I mean, I think one thing that I wish I did was that after I graduated and like I understood that I was taking a gap year, I wish I just took like 2 weeks to just, you know, relax, get my study materials in order, make sure I knew what resources I was going to do, and even formulate like a study plan or something, and then like started studying really hard and like really going for it. Because for me, I was just kind of lackadaisical, like figuring out my resources while I was studying and making my plan while I was studying, and it just like really extended out my MCAT studying. So definitely like know what kind of studier you are, make that game plan, and then tackle it. Just like don't try to intertwine all of it while
Oh, okay. I think her internet is having a little bit of an issue. So I guess when she comes back, she can finish. But Kitty, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I would say for me, the biggest thing or the biggest mistake that I see pre-meds make is taking the gap years and then doing things that you don't enjoy doing. So if you're gonna take the gap years, like make sure that you are actually doing something that is one going to be beneficial for you in the long run, but also something that you actually want to do. Because if you're just taking a gap year just to say, I took gap years and here's all of this stuff that I did, but I didn't enjoy it and I didn't really learn anything from it, then it was kind of like, well, what was the point in taking the gap years? So even if it's something that you've wanted to do like all of your life that might not even be medically related, if that's what you want to do during your gap years, then just go ahead and do it. Just make sure that whatever you're doing is going to be, powerful for you, enriching for you, and that you can get something out of it and you enjoy it.
Okay. Olamide, are you back? Okay, I'm just gonna move on to
can you guys hear me right now?
Oh yeah, we can hear you. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Did you hear any of my answer?
Yeah, yes, we heard some of it.
All right, cool. Well, yeah, just take the MCAT as soon as you can, but be smart about it.
Okay. So my next question is, how did y'all go about finding jobs or opportunities that you did during your gap years? And like, it's a two-part question. Did you look for those jobs during your senior year, or were you already in your gap year before looking for it?
So for the last part of the question, I looked for my job during my senior year after like having my score, and I knew that I wasn't applying. And I actually found my job opportunity on a late night LinkedIn search because I was just at the point where I'm about to have a degree, somebody gonna hire me. And so I would definitely recommend looking on LinkedIn and making sure that you follow specific industries and or specific companies that are in the realm of where you want to work. So if you want to do like specialist work or being a technician, following academic research centers because they're always hiring for different positions, and just making sure that you're tailoring your search to your interest and not just like taking any job.
Yeah, for me, I did not find the job during my senior year, and I didn't make the decision on what it was I wanted to do in terms of working until after I had graduated. I would want to say it was like a week later. And thankfully, education, they always need teachers. So it was very, very easy for me to find a job. But yeah, I would definitely say like use your resources. Like Adrian was saying, like use LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great resource to find different jobs and different things, especially in the medical field. And I forget, what was the second part of the question? Or was that the second part?
The second part of the question was how you were able to find the opportunities.
Got you. My sister was a teacher. So she was kind of like, this is what you need to do. This is everything you need to apply. Here's a job fair, go do it. And that was pretty much it for me.
While we wait for Olamide to come back, I had a follow-up question for you guys that I just forgot, and I'm so upset. What was the question? So I think the follow-up question was, oh, I remember now. So I don't know if you guys mentioned your majors, but I know for myself, when I was applying for jobs during my senior year, I majored in human biology. And in the back of my head, I was like, what am I going to do with this degree? Because in my head, the degree was the middleman because I knew, okay, I'm just completing college so I can get to med school. So I'm curious if you guys struggle trying to find a transitional career, because we all know that the bigger plan was medical school. So if so, like, how did you navigate either did you find a job within your major, or did you just try to find a job outside of your major, or kind of how to navigate that? And then I guess for Katie, because you talk about being a teacher, was this something you always wanted to do, or was it just kind of like, I'm going to explore this and then see if I still want to go into medicine?
Yeah, for my major was health sciences preclinical. And I knew that there were like research positions and things like that that I could have probably applied for. But in terms of teaching, it was something that I wanted to do when I was younger. And I wanted to test it out because when I was in college, I had started a mentoring program at UCF. And so I was already like kind of into like helping high school age students, mentoring them. And I kind of wanted to see what would happen if I joined the education field. And also was kind of like a double whammy because I wasn't very confident in my abilities to even get into medical school, that I wanted to see if education would be something that I could see myself potentially doing for the rest of my life. And that wasn't the case. Not to say that I didn't love teaching, because I wholeheartedly loved it, but I thought the pinch to go to medical school and to become a doctor never left. So.
I want Olamide to talk with like.
I am so sorry. I don't know what is happening. Wi-Fi is against me today.
I'm like, worst case scenario.
Can you just repeat the question?
If you turn off your video, like at least we can get the audio. That might like help.
Okay. Yeah, I did also connect to my hotspot. I don't know if that will be any better, but
but try to keep your video on if you can, because if you turn off your video here on YouTube, they can no longer see you. Because like people like literally just take you off.
Gotcha. Okay, no problem. So what was the question?
So Shayla's question was about majors, and so for people who did eventually take a gap year, Shayla talked about how she did human biology. Human biology was not obviously what she planned to go into, but taking a gap year meant trying to find a job with that human biology degree. Did any of you all have that kind of problem?
Yeah, well, I think like the main purpose for my gap year is that I really wanted to get the clinical and the research experience. And for me, my major was I was a functional biology major. So I definitely did use that to try to get jobs in the science, biology, medical field. And I missed the question earlier, but I did start applying to jobs my senior year of college. And I just went on like, I don't know, that website that everyone goes on. I don't know if it's like Glassdoor. It's like that other one where you just apply to a bunch of them. Yeah, Adrian might know. But yeah, I just went through and I just applied to like 30 jobs and just waited for someone to apply to like respond to me. And then I had a year in that job and I realized that I feel like I've maxed out all my opportunities and the experience and like what I could gain from that. So that's when I started going on the websites of like academic institutions. I worked as a clinical research coordinator at Johns Hopkins. So I went on their website and I just applied to every single clinical research job that they had. And literally one person got back to me. Like I'm still getting like rejection letters from Hopkins, and my last day at work was yesterday. So yeah, you just really have to just keep applying until somebody bites. Now I feel like we're in a market where like, I feel like everybody is looking to hire someone. So it might be easier to find a gap year job, but just literally don't give up. Just keep going.
And then to tackle Shon's question, I was a biological sciences major, but I also received a minor in Spanish. So I was open to like a lot of jobs. And I would also like to say, never sleep on actually the teaching profession, because some schools, if you just graduate, you can get hired on as an adjunct. So that's always something to look into. And especially if you're seeing that you're having gaps in your content knowledge on the MCAT, that's like a great way to reinforce it by being a teacher and reviewing those concepts yourself. So I know a couple of friends that they took that route and they were adjuncts. And so For jobs, I just say like, yes, Glassdoor, Indeed, getting on all of those types of websites to really just put yourself out there. And more importantly, networking. If your school has any type of like pre-med, pre-chemistry, any health professional society, stay in touch with those people running that. And sometimes they hear about jobs that, you know, aren't getting much attention, which is why they're like sending emails out to people that run these societies. And you can do some really, find some really good jobs that way that are very lucrative and a lot of people don't know about.
Thank you all so much. I just wanted to add the last thing is that even if your degree was something very specific, like, oh, like biology or biochem, and you knew you got that degree because you're going to medical school, but don't actually plan to use it to work, that's okay. You don't have to put biochem in the Indeed search bar when looking for a job. You can, you know, there's flexibility in the real world about like what you can use that degree to work as. So our next question is—
before we go on to the next question, I just wanted to add to what everyone said, because I also took 2 gap years as well. And my first gap year, I worked at a federally qualified community health center. And in my second gap year, I worked at Stanford School of Medicine in a residency program, but more from the educational side of things, as opposed to like a research coordinator. And what I will say is something I've learned, and just in terms of just applying to jobs, and this is what I tell people when applying to jobs, especially with these Indeeds, when you're applying for research positions on these academic institutions, it feels as if your application goes into a black hole and you just don't know whatever happens to the application after that. So when I was looking for my second job in my second gap year, after I would apply to something, I would literally Google search or find whether it was the director of that office or the hiring manager or somebody in that office that like would probably know about that job posting. I would email them and say, hey, I actually just submitted my application. I've attached my resume for quicker viewing. You know, I'm definitely interested in this position. I just wanted to like, you know, give you a heads up and let you know that I'm really interested in the position. And that's actually how I got my second job, because I had applied to like the Stanford portal, and no one ever knows what happens. I don't know what happens with those applications. But it was because I emailed who was going to be my supervisor. She responded like within minutes. And before you know it, from that email conversation, I got a phone screening interview and then ultimately got hired. And like, that was just because I reached out to her, and as opposed to like passively waiting to hear them get back to me from this application that goes into the black hole. Because the thing is, a lot of people are applying to the same position. So like some applications may never actually get seen. So I encourage you to like network and find a contact, find someone tangible to email to say, hey, like I submitted, be on the lookout for my application. So that way they can just pull your application from that black hole.
Okay, thank you. So our next question is about, so from my experience, the real world is ghetto. And immediately after undergrad, when I realized that, you know, med school at that point was a bust for me, it was like, okay, go get a job. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that because I can't imagine entering. And that's why I went to get a master's, I'll be honest. But most of you mentioned that you went to work. So what was that adjustment like? Like, what was that adjustment going from undergrad and working in the real world?
Rough, definitely rough. Yeah, but I mean, it was hard. It was an adjustment, but I feel like it's going to be an adjustment for medical school. So like at the end of the day, it was, I got to be an adult now. Like there is no baby adult. I'm in college. I'm kind of an adult, but not really. I don't have full responsibilities. It was just kind of like, all right, well, you made this decision. So now you have to, you know, put on your big girl pants and go out there and do it. So, but it was definitely an adjustment. It took a minute, but once you get into the groove of things, it's fine.
I'd have to say I found out real quickly the real world is ghetto, because As soon as I realized once you start working, there's no spring break, there's no winter break. It's you gotta come back for that 9 to 5 or whatever shift you work in. Yep, only get to spend your PTO. So if you want to take off, you're paying for it eventually. And you only accrue a certain amount of sick days. I wasn't used to that, Lord. And oh man, I was just like, oh, whew, real ghetto. So you're coddled in college, so I would say enjoy it now while it lasts, because when they get you out there in that real world, they be tearing you up. That I was not ready for that. And all the meetings all of a sudden that people want to have, because like for my lab, we had a lab meeting on Friday, this seminar on this day, and I was just like, I'm tired of being in meetings, but you'll survive. But it's a little overwhelming at first.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everyone here. It was a very rough transition for me, especially like for me before getting a job. Like I like in college, I was playing volleyball and I was doing track. So like I have a very like athlete mindset. Like if anything good happens, I just like yell and like high five everyone and just like huddle up in the middle. And then at work, it's like that just doesn't happen. Like if anything good happens, someone will just send an email and just be like, "Good job, Olamide." I'm like, nice. Like, I don't know. It was really rough for me, honestly. But I think like one advice I would give is like, while you're working these jobs to like, build up your resume or build up your GPA, like definitely try to keep doing things that really fill up your cup. Like for me, like I love to be creative. I like to travel a little bit. I like to be organized and like kind of do like planning stuff. So like I did wedding coordinating. I traveled. I have a YouTube channel as well, and I do a lot of like different things that I really enjoy. And so like while you're kind of doing that, getting those checklists out of the way, like definitely just try to have something you can look forward to at the end of the day or like at the end of the week. And it does make the time pass a lot easier and smoother, in my opinion. And I think it helps when in your applications because it gives you something to talk about with your interviewers, because they were all excited to talk about all the stuff that had nothing to do with science on my application. So definitely kind of like stay true to who you are while going through this journey.
Okay, thank you so much. And just as a follow-up to that, you all mentioned some of that a little bit, but particularly like the struggles of adulting, were there any struggles that you found that you faced specifically as a Black woman navigating certain white spaces? Feel free to share.
I'm gonna just set the stage for where I taught. I taught at the #1 school in the district in a predominantly white area, in a predominantly rich white area, and I was the only Black science teacher for the entire time that I was there, all the way up until my last day a month ago. And there were so many struggles in terms of, thankfully, my boss was very, very nice and she was great. I love her, still talk to her to this day. But in terms of resources for the minority students at the school, it was mentally draining for me because of how mentally draining it was for them. Like in terms of dress code, who gets dress coded the most? Black, Hispanic, white girls just walk around, can wear whatever they want. Who's getting all the resources? It's the IB, AP students, not the ones who were like actually struggling. And those were the students that I was teaching. I taught both. But the bulk of my students were like the lower 25%. So I spent a lot of my time with the Hispanic students, with the Black students. And for them, it was like, you're the only Black teacher I got. So like, let's have fun, And so I think for me, the struggle was more from my students' perspectives and seeing like how much they struggled because of the lack of resources that they had specifically to them, how they were treated as almost second-class citizens in the school. And so my goal was to, #1, make sure that they didn't feel like that when they were in my room, and to also educate the other teachers and administrators that were there of what the struggle is like for myself and for those students and other minority students who are in this education field. So yeah, it was rough, but we got through it,
Does anybody else want to add something? Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'll add. So for almost like very similar situation. So I was working at UCSF, a very well-known university, in a academic research lab, and I was the only Black person on the entire floor. And oh yes, it was very lonely. You do not see many Black people in research, specifically Black women. And so for me specifically, I had to, my boss, he was great about it though. Like he had a lot of great initiatives for us to keep us motivated. And he would do one-on-one meetings and check in with me specifically, because it does get lonely when you're literally the only person on the floor. And so I appreciated him being cognizant of that, but it is a lot of like teaching your coworkers, because I like to change up my hair. So I was rocking my wigs and they'd be like, oh my gosh, your hair grew overnight. I'm just like, baby, this is an Amazon wig. Like, so just like having to deal with that. So it's like a little bit of a transition, because I had a really close-knit group of Black female friends when I was in college. And so I didn't think about like having to explain like, oh, your hair is different today. But that was an adjustment, and overall just like being one of the few Black women and not having someone to vent to. So that was very interesting. But overall, my coworkers, they're super nice, and like they really did their best to like have a space for me to talk to them. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I will just put in my experience. I don't know if it got to the point where I wondered if I was the issue, because the same theme happened in both my jobs, where my mentality is I'm not coming to work to kiki with you or be your friend. I'm coming to get the paycheck, do what I got to do, and go home. I got my friends outside of work, you know? So that's kind of how I always approach the work setting. So when I am in a work setting, I'm a lot more reserved. I'm kind of one of those people, I don't really speak unless spoken to, or, you know, I'm working on something and I just mind my business. You know, I keep to myself. I do what I got to do. And I received feedback from both places that it was coming across as if like I didn't care to engage with other people in the work environment or things like that. And some kind of way, because I'm like, so part of my work performance is socializing, because then it becomes, if I then start socializing, it's going to be, oh, Sean, you never focus on your work, you're always talking with your colleagues. And it kind of felt like, how am I going to navigate that? And I think ultimately what I had to learn to do, and I think this was a huge learning lesson, because the truth of the matter is we are people of color going into a very white field, which is medicine. And lessons are not going to stop here. Like, it's not just happens in your gap year. It's going to happen in medical school. Your class is going to be majority people of color, right? When you're working with your colleagues in residency, your patients, all that kind of stuff. So one thing I learned is that I have to find a balance of like being work social, where it's like saying, hi, how are you doing? You know, even if I don't really care how you're doing today, but I'm still going to ask, right? To be respectful and to kind of extend that olive branch, so it doesn't seem like I'm shutting you out or I don't care to like be a part of you guys. And I think that's something that it was a tough lesson to learn for me, because I kind of felt like, well, as long as I'm doing my job, why is this a problem that I don't, you know, that I don't put myself out there as much. But I learned that you have to find a balance between making work friends and at the same time getting your job done. Because the truth of the matter is, sometimes you need work friends, because sometimes people be acting funny at work. And if everyone thinks you're that person that's reserved, doesn't want to talk to anyone, sometimes people won't have your back, you know, when something happens, right? Or you won't be able to get the kiki or know what's happening behind closed doors if you don't have someone at work you can, like, you know, that can be your person. They don't have to be your personal person, but they can be like your work person, right? Someone that, like, you know, we're good enough where if something's happening, she'll put me on before I find out, like, you know, later along the line.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I think that making work friends is definitely going to make the whole experience a little bit easier. I think for me, like I grew up in like the suburbs of Massachusetts, and then I played volleyball, which is a majority white sport. So I'm pretty used to being in white spaces like my whole life. So I guess like starting work like outside of college and in hospitals, I definitely wasn't surprised by the lack of diversity. But I think that it got really hard for me kind of, during the start of the pandemic with the George Floyd incident that happened and murder that happened. And I don't know, I felt like that was the first time where I just felt really alone at work. And I think like for me, like I was just really honest to my supervisors and letting them know that like, I kind of need a day off, like I need a break. And so I think that's another tip is just like know when you need a break. Don't just try to fight through it all the time. Like sometimes you just really need that space. So just like let your bosses know. Let your bosses know if you just need some time off, and they should respect that.
Okay, my next question is kind of about adulting. How did y'all transition from having, if you live like on campus in college, having rent, utilities, everything in one bill that you paid through Sally Mae to actually picking out your internet, picking out cable? Like, was that just an easy thing or was there any struggle? And how did you deal with it?
I'll tackle that one first. So I was living off campus while in college. So I didn't really have that transition once I left college. Actually, once I left college, I was making way more money than I ever had before. So it actually made that transition a little bit smoother for me. But yeah, just budgeting really helped. I definitely live a pretty frugal lifestyle as well. So I don't feel like I really struggled too much in that department. But yeah, adulting can definitely be tough. I definitely had to call up my older siblings, call my mom. I definitely, and like YouTube, Google, just really try to outsource like any type of problems that I had.
So I also was living off campus during my end of college, but I was working as an RA, so I was not used to like paying for my housing. And then I graduated and I moved out, and I did live with family, but they charged me rent because they were like, we're not going to coddle you. You need to be a grown woman, and grown women have bills. And my parents kicked me off the phone bill. So they were like, nope, girl, if you want Verizon, you got to pay for it yourself. I mean, but luckily I had a really good job and it paid well. So it wasn't as shocking, but credit is tied to everything. So that was a big lesson that I learned while adulting. And also for utilities, if you don't need to have all the lights on in your place, turn them off. Save that. Don't do it. Don't be that person. You leave a room and the lights are on because you are paying for that light, or somebody else is paying it if you're not covering that bill. So that was pretty shocking because you're like, electricity, it can't be that expensive. It is, especially if you leaving the lights on all the time. So definitely be mindful of that.
So I would say for me, I'm in a little bit more of a unique situation because I live near the university I went to. I stayed with my parents and I'm still staying with my parents. So throughout this entire time, I've been at home. So all this stuff, the rent, the utilities, as I'm preparing to go to medical school, I'm like, okay, so this is how this works. I have to turn this on. This has to be on by a certain day. So it's a little crazy right now. But honestly, I think if anyone else is in that situation where you are living with parents or family, like Adrian said, and they are covering the bulk of like your living situation and things like that, try and become more financially literate. For me, I use my brother. He was a finance major and is an accountant and all of that. So he helped me create a budget during my first year as a teacher. So that way I was able to buy a car. I was able to pay my tuition while I was doing those extra classes for both colleges that I was at. And I had credit card debt because, you're a broke college student. So what do? You go get a credit card that you now have to pay off. And so he really guided me on how to become financially literate, how to invest funds, and how to budget your money. So now that I am preparing to do all of this on my own, it's nowhere near as stressful as I think it would be if I didn't have that background in finances, thanks to him. So I would say the biggest advice for that is just do your research, if you can find a financial advisor that is willing to do it potentially for free, like a family friend or something, definitely do that, because that's going to make your life so much easier.
That's great. And for all the finance talk, we're actually going to have a Zoom party later on in the series about finances. So like, don't miss that. Do not miss that. You want to be there.
I just want to quickly add before, I feel like now I'm a panelist and Dora's the one moderating. But I just wanted to quickly add, your gap year, especially if you know you're going to take more than one, it is and then you know you're going to be working full time, it is the perfect opportunity to save money. Even in college, if you know that you're going to be taking gap years, save money in college. If you have a little side hustle, work study, if you braiding hairs in the back of your dorm, if you know, whatever it is you're doing, save money. Because the upfront cost of becoming an adult after college, especially if you don't have family support or you're out of state and you're not in the same place as your family, is very expensive, right? Because college shelters you where after you pay the tuition, room, and board, they're not asking you for nothing. They're not sending you a bill every month for whatever. They kind of handle everything. So when you're running that tap water, you're not thinking about how much it costs, right? When you leave on every single light, you're not thinking about how much it costs. But when you move and when you become an adult, you're paying a security deposit for your place. You're paying first month's rent, last month's rent, which could easily become like $5,000 just to move in to the place. And that's not even considering you're going to set up your utilities, you're going to set up your Wi-Fi, you're going to do all this stuff, right? So save money in college for upfront costs if you're going to take gap years. In your gap years, if you're working full time, save money. And as much as possible, I think Katie mentioned, paying off a credit card. If you have a little student credit card, try to minimize your debt before you start medical school. So in my gap year, I wasn't saving money the first year because I was not making much, but the second year when I made a little bit more after I paid for everything on my credit card with my application, and I told myself, Sean, before you enter medical school, this credit card needs to be paid off. So I was very aggressive with it and I paid it off, and then I saved money on top of that because I knew I was moving to a whole different state for medical school. So I knew that I have to ship my car, which is about almost $2,000. I'm gonna ship boxes. I know I'm going to get a place, all this kind of stuff. So save money during your gap year. It is so important. And it's the best thing you can do for yourself because a lot of medical schools will not disperse your funds until after school has started. So you can't be relying on the financial aid saying, okay, I'm going to use the financial aid to pay for A, B, and C, because you need to have A, B, and C done before school even gives you the money.
Thank you.
And okay. Sorry, one more point that I did want to add is to really make sure you have like a set division of like where your finances are. Like for me, I had an account for my savings, I had an account for all my bills, and then I had an account for personal use. And so anytime I would get paid, like a certain percentage of my paycheck would go to each account. So I wouldn't have to do that math myself every month or forget to do that math. And now I have all this money in my personal use part. So like definitely create divisions in your bank account, and then maybe get like a Cash App card or a Venmo card for like personal use. And I feel like that was really helpful in like saving money and budgeting.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. So our next question is about post-grad depression. Did any of you experience that? And if you did, how did you go about it?
Honestly, I think the post-grad depression is probably one of the toughest things about taking a gap year, or multiple gap years, at least for me, because I saw like my friends who applied to medical school right away, got in, and now they're basically starting their or finishing their medical school journey like before I can. And so I definitely struggled with it a lot, I would say, within the first 6 months. And then on top of it, adulting and trying to figure all that out and just adjusting to life. It does get rough, but it does get better. And I think the thing that got me through was knowing, like, at the end of the day, everything that I'm doing from this point on is just going to better me. And it's just going to make me a better medical student, a better doctor, a better person, because I'm getting all of this life experience that someone else might not be getting. So I think always having like the end goal in mind is that I might not be there today, but I'm gonna be there one day. And when I am there, I have all of this that I can fall back on. I have people that I've met that I would not have met had I gone straight off to medical school. Like I said, again, experiences, being financially literate, like there's so many things, benefits of having these gap years that I took. And honestly, if I would have applied to medical school and got in right after college, I don't even know if I would have made it through medical school. Like, honestly, like that's just how it is. So it's going to be rough at the beginning, but just keep the end in mind. And as long as you do that, like you'll be straight.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. I definitely was pretty real for the first few months outside of college. And I think that's why I struggled with, starting to start studying for my MCAT right away. And I think that one thing that really helped me was going to therapy. Like anytime I'm going through any type of big transition in my life, transitioning from college to post grad, I had a therapist kind of like talking me through that. And, therapy is expensive, but I was able to do it through my college. And, I know that there's other websites that I don't specifically know of off the top of my head, but there are some affordable options. And like now I'm going through this transition of working to going back to school. So now I'm back in therapy again, just kind of like having somebody every week to talk through about that. And yeah, it definitely has done wonders. Journaling is also amazing as well. But yeah, find a therapist.
And to piggyback on that, for me, it wasn't per se post-grad depression. I was more in a very rough bereavement process, which it started around graduation because like my grandfather literally died on the morning of my graduation. So it was rough. And so I'd say for that to manage it, finding someone that you can talk to. So yes, therapy is great. If you have friends that can console you and you can talk to, and just like getting those feelings out there in the open is much better than bottling them in, because I do know for some people therapy can be expensive or you don't have those resources in your area. So just finding someone that you can truly talk it out with is very important. And just like wellness, find something that brings you joy and really hold on to that and make that a constant, whether it's weekly or monthly, whatever it may be. So for me personally, I would just go walking. Like every Saturday, I would go with my aunt and we would go walking. And that just became our thing. So we were getting in our fitness, really cathartic, and just like traveling to go to different trails and stuff and looking at views and just being out in nature. So I would definitely recommend that if you are experiencing post-grad depression, is to find something that really makes you happy and like just scheduling time for that.
Yeah, I agree with everything that was said. Me personally, I think I struggle with change in general because I don't like change. I don't like change. So I'm someone that struggles with change. And I got out of care with my psychiatrist from college because obviously I didn't have the same kind of like insurance that the school was offering, whatever. And it's actually really hard to find a Black psychiatrist or a Black therapist, especially depending on where you are. But eventually, when I switched jobs, I got my new jobs. I hit the girls up again. I said, "Hey, girl, you still taking patients? Because I'm coming back." And I was very happy to have come back to therapy the year before, like in that last gap year before medical school, because it allowed me to learn a lot about myself, but also like really get into space of emotional maturity. Emotional maturity is very important in medical school. And in order to be grounded in medical school, you have to have a good sense of knowing who you are, how you cope, how you handle stress, how you deal with sad news, how to balance life happening while you still have obligations and responsibilities, because life does not stop because something happened to you. So I am a huge proponent of going to see a psychiatrist or going into therapy, even if you aren't struggling with anything. Just go talk and learn more about yourself, discover yourself, use that as an opportunity to figure out how can I become a better version of myself.
And one thing I wanted to add with therapy, at least like one idea that I thought it had to be like this commitment where I have to go for like a year every week. But I actually ended up going for like every week for like 2 months. And I felt like that was already so helpful compared to if I didn't go at all. So even if you just have like 2 months or 3 months to do it, like it does not have to be this full on commitment that you have to do for years and years. Like just a little bit helps.
Okay, thank you so much. And so our next question is like, it's a two-part question. How are you able to balance applying to medical school and like working, as well? How were you able to talk about the fact that you took gap years in your application? Do I need to repeat that? Okay.
Yeah, maybe repeat it one more time for me.
So I said, like, how were you able to, so like for me, there was a time I was working last year, I had to let my boss know, like, oh, I'm not gonna be around, like I have interviews, that kind of stuff. So like, how were you able to manage the actual application process and working? And how did you talk about applying in your application? Sorry, how did you talk about having taken gap years? Because I remember some secondary like essays actually asked about it.
Sorry. So for my second gap year job, when I was applying, I just like straight up told them at the interview that I was applying to medical school. Like I didn't ask for any like special favors or anything at the interview, but I just like wanted them to know that that's this current situation that I'm in. And luckily, like the position that I was hired for is like all the research coordinators in that position were also applying to medical school. So it was like a common thing that they saw, which made it a lot easier. Yeah. And that was even amazing because like all my coworkers, like we could all talk about like the application process, which sometimes was like intimidating because, you know, some people are like have really stellar applicants and they don't have what you have, but you know, it's even better because they share some tips that they're doing that like I would have never even thought of. So then like I adopted, and like same, you know, vice versa. So I mean, I think that was a really great part about the gap year experience. And then the second part was talking about it on your secondaries. Let's see. Because the question would just be like, how did you did you take a gap year and how did you spend it, right? Yeah. So I
only on secondaries, like even the stuff I did during my gap years, like they made an appearance in my personal statement as well. So like, how did you just talk about those things in general in your application?
Yeah. So I think like for my personal statement, it was just like it was kind of like a full circle moment. So I started my personal statement with like kind of what I'm doing now in research, and like how that has really helped me kind of continue on this path of becoming a physician. And then in the middle of my personal statement, and I kind of talk about where it all started because I wanted to become a doctor before this job. So I think kind of wrapping it around like maybe starting out with what you're doing now and then like kind of how you got there was really helpful for me. And then in the secondary portion, I think I just like had paragraphs. I definitely did not do my secondary, like it wasn't this like creative writing piece. Like I just straight up told them what I did and what I learned from it and how I think that it would translate into being a med student, you know, working with a team, high pressure situation, you know, having to contact and be in contact with doctors and nurses. So yeah, that was my experience.
I would say for me, let me not say thankfully because the pandemic was a horrible time and it was rough. We have to remember that. But applying during the pandemic had its struggles, but it also had its benefits because I was able to do my entire primary like while we were on lockdown. So there was no distractions, you know what I mean? It did get rough with secondaries because I did have to go back to work. And when the secondaries hit, and you got to get them done. So I was very upfront with my school, and they knew that I was going to be applying to medical school pretty much from day one of me starting at my job. So they pretty much have been on the journey with me since the beginning. So they were very understanding. I took a few days off. If you are working full time, definitely save up your sick leave for that year that you're applying because you're probably going to want to take some time off to do secondaries. you're definitely going to need to take time off for your interviews, and you don't want to miss out on pay for that. So that would be like my advice in terms of being a full-time worker and still having time to do everything else. In terms of including it in my application, like Olamide said, it was in my primary statement. My gap years are make me. So it wasn't a situation of, do I not include them? Do I include it in my personal statement? Like that was these years have been a defining moment for me. So naturally it was included. But with the secondaries, yeah, if there is a question about, did you take time off from school? I was pretty just upfront about it. This is what I did, just like Olamide said, so.
For me, how I balanced everything was I absolutely live by planners. I spend a lot of money on planners. I get Erin Condren planners, 10 out of 10 would recommend. And so for me, I just really planned everything out. Like I set weekly goals for myself and to-do list. Even at my job, and I would communicate with them in advance. And especially for interviews, it gets a little tricky because sometimes you only have like roughly 2 weeks notice before you have your next interview. But as soon as I scheduled my interview date, I would like text my supervisor like, hey, I actually won't be coming in. And I would save my PTO so I could make sure I could attend interviews. And more importantly, when I talked about it on my applications and just throughout this process in general, for me, my gap years were actually very strengthening of my application, being that I was living in, I just moved out of Oakland, California. And so that area specifically is a very underserved population. And especially in light of COVID, a lot of the cases were popping up in Oakland, and just seeing firsthand how economic disparities really can determine outcomes of health. I think that really strengthened my application, gave me knowledge of systems and how they can sometimes work against the people that they're meant to help. And I felt like that really strengthened my application. And also, given the pandemic, I was able to reduce my hours, but I was appointed as an essential worker. So I was still coming in, but it was not Monday through Friday. It was like one day, Wednesday, Friday, or whatnot. And so that did give me more room to focus on my applications. But as soon as things started picking back up again, it was a lot of communication and like really planning out what I had to get done and making sure that I was still making my application goals, but also still making my goals at work.
Okay. I just wanted to add that, especially for taking time off for interviews, due to the unfortunate incidents of the pandemic, we were fortunate to not have to go anywhere for our interviews. So we didn't have to fly anywhere. If we're taking a day, we're taking that day off. But once people start flying again for your interviews, you might be needing to take like more than a day off for like actually going to wherever you need to go and stuff. So just take that into consideration. And we're almost at the end. This question is particularly for Katie. How did you make a decision to do like the post-bac work or the master's? I don't know, like, but how did you make that? Because everybody else just worked, but how did you make that decision to do that?
So for me, it was, I kind of didn't have a choice. I was the student who had graduating a 2.8 science GPA. Majority of the schools, with the exception of like Harvard or Johns Hopkins or something, their cutoff is 3.0 science. And I needed to get my GPA up. So I decided to basically just take higher level science classes that I did not take during undergrad at UCF. For about a year, I mapped out how many A's I had to get in order to get up to the 3.0 cutoff, and pretty much just planned it from there. So it wasn't, unfortunately, it was like, if you want to go to medical school, you kind of have to do this. I know that some people will do like a formal master's program instead of doing like the whole DIY route that I took. The reason why I did not do the master's program is because my application would have been screened out because of my undergrad GPA. even with the master's for those schools who don't do the holistic screening from the beginning. So that was my reasoning. And also I didn't have to take out any more loans. I just had to pay it out of pocket. So.
Okay, and my last question, like from me, not from me, is we're all starting sometime soon. Some people it's a month, some in 2. How are you feeling? We've been in the adult world, and now we have, like, some of us have to go back to school for the first time in a very long time. I've not seen science content in 3 years now, and that's like, yeah, I've not seen science content in a while. Some, like Katie, you were teaching, but I mean, like, you kind of, went to classes, but how are you all feeling? And how do you plan to just adjust to the fact that you're going to be a student again pretty soon?
While they simmer on that, I could say for me, I had that fear as well because I was like, oh snap, I mean, I took physics during my first gap year because it was the only class I didn't take at Stanford. But I was like, the girl has not had to use her brain in a minute. What am I gonna do? And I used the opportunity to do my school's pre-matriculation program because I felt like it would kind of it would just let me put my feet in the water so I can like prepare for like the work coming up. Did I find it like helpful in terms of like the full swing of school? Maybe not, because they weren't, at least for my pre-matriculation program, they weren't collecting grades or had us doing exams. So it's just kind of like you just go to absorb the material. But I would say if your headspace is right and if you want to succeed, you will. You will put there's a switch that just goes off. At least for me, the moment school started, this switch just like turned on and like I just went full force.
Yeah, honestly, for me, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. I was gonna say I'm honestly pretty excited. Like I really like school. Honestly, like I'm ready to go back. I do not really enjoy working that much, at least not yet. Maybe in 4 to 5 years, my mind will change. But unfortunately, my school does not have a pre-matriculation program, so there are some nerves in that department. But I'm like, at least we're all on the same boat. Like I don't know, whether I like it or not, it's gonna start. And I think like for so long I've been like praying and hoping for this day to come. So I think like just that alone is enough to just like get me excited to start. So that's where I'm at mentally. But ask me again once school starts.
Yeah, and honestly, for me, like even with being a teacher and doing the post-bac or whatever, I'm just excited to not work and be in school at the same time because I worked all through undergrad and then went back, and I'm just excited to actually be a full-time student, and that's my only job, like, but that's similar to what Olamide was saying, and I'm just excited. Like I haven't gotten anxious or like scared or worried or anything like that yet. So I'm just kind of living it up, and like what I've been dreaming for since I was like 8 years old is finally coming true. So having that like in my spotlight, it just, I don't know. I can't even describe the feeling of the fact that I get to start in a month,
To piggyback on that, I'm actually not nervous to start. I'm used to being a student, so I'm like, okay, yes, I'm used to this, like studying all day. So I'm actually not terrified. And my school also doesn't offer pre-matriculation, but I've been finding ways to like keep myself engaged in studying. Like I'm like learning 2 languages right now. So I always find ways to like keep my brain active. So I'm not worried that she's been on the back burner too long. So I think she's like kind of warmed up. I mean, she's going to get thrown onto the fire after orientation is over, but no, overall, I think I should be fine. I might have to tweak my studying a little bit depending on like what we're learning, because I know for the kidneys, those are my worst enemies. So when we get to that part, I'm going to be tweaking a lot.
Girl, I got you. I got an A in the my renal block. I got you, girl.
Send me your notes, please, because I don't understand the kidneys.
Okay, so that's all the questions I have. Sharon, did you have
So we have about 4 more minutes, so I want to quickly wrap up. There's a few questions in the Q&A, and I think the first question, because I guess a lot of you guys talked about balancing the MCAT and your gap years, but one question was, what are some of the pros and cons of choosing to be a research coordinator during your gap year?
All right, I'll tackle that. I really have pros, honestly. I think it's a great position to be in because you get that clinical experience. Well, if you're a clinical research coordinator, you get to have that clinical experience, patient interaction, speaking to doctors and nurses. But then you also get that research experience where you're doing the research on all the clinical data that you're collecting. So I think that it's a great avenue to just get all that well-roundedness checked out for medical school. Also, you kind of get a chance to find other opportunities. Like if I found out that I'm like really more leaning on the research side, you have that opportunity to contact your PI and look for publication opportunities, abstract opportunities. And if you find yourself more liking the clinical side, if you're in an academic institution, you can reach out to other doctors of different departments, see if they'll let you shadow or even have a phone call. I definitely found myself really liking the clinical side a little bit more. So I did a lot of shadowing as a research coordinator. Like I shadowed in peds, endocrinology, plastic surgery, ENT, orthopedics. Like I was shadowing all the time and I loved it. So I definitely think that it's a great job to get into. I can't necessarily think of any cons at the moment, but yeah.
Yeah, I was also a research coordinator, and I'll say like one of the big pros for me was that I could set my own schedule. So my PI was very much these are the set of things you have to do, just do them by this date. And so it was really nice. I think we can go to the next question.
Yeah, so the next question, I forget who was, it might have been Katie, but about living at home, did you find your parents abuse your presence, or how do you create your own space and schedule independent while living at home? And Adrian too, but it sounds like Adrian was paying to be there, so
that is funny, as I can hear my mom back here right now. Did my parents abuse my presence? No, I would say no. I think, they respected the fact that I was an adult, and especially once college was over, like I was teaching somebody else's child. Like it was kind of hard to kind of be like, oh, you're still a kid when you paying your own bills and doing your own thing. In terms of studying at home, it is a struggle because you do have other people that you're living with. But I think that would be a struggle if you had roommates who were maybe different majors and things like that. So that could be like a good correlation there. But I had my own desk, I had my own place in my room. And that's just pretty much where I studied. If I felt like I needed to go off, like outside of the house, I would study like on campus during undergrad, post grad. And then for the MCAT, the second time around, that was during the pandemic. So I couldn't really go anywhere. But I think the biggest thing with living at home is just make sure that you set boundaries and that kind of thing. If you can, with your family members, they all know what your goal is. So if it's something where they just keep popping up in your room and you're trying to study, hey, I'm trying to study, like, just give me my time, and then we could go spend time together later. But also, like, in terms of finances and things like that, just make sure that you do financial literacy. If you do have your own bills, make sure that you come up with your own plan to pay your own bills and kind of steer away from having your parents provide for everything, because then it will be a little bit more challenging during your gap years and in medical school.
Okay, well, one last question. Oh, okay, we'll do two if that's okay, and then we'll round up. Olamide, someone's curious how you got a full scholarship for med school. And then this might go towards Katie. Was being a teacher helpful for studying or remembering science content?
Okay, I'll go first. That's kind of a hard question to answer because, I wasn't really in the room making that decision. But if I could give like my theories or ideas, I don't know. Well, first, I have a whole video on that on my YouTube channel if you ever want to check that out. But I guess just to like make it a bit short, I would say my biggest thing was my activities. I had a lot of activities. I got the clinical stuff that I needed, the research stuff. But like I said earlier, I was definitely still making sure that I was getting involved in things that really represented who I was as a person. So whether it's in like in creative route or in the athletics route or, planning and organizations, like those are just things that really represent who I am. And I think that that's something that could also benefit schools because they see like, I don't think like they're gonna make me be like a social media person, but if they see that like I'm open to talk about things and, I have all these interests to really talk about, I don't know. I feel like they just really like that I wasn't just a cookie cutter person, that I had a little bit more personality to me on my applications. Also big on networking as well. I was reaching out to like the dean of almost every department, like asking them about their financial aid and stuff like that. And if one school offered me like a smaller scholarship, I used that and negotiated with other schools. So definitely focus on your activities, network, and negotiate are my 3 big tips.
And then for the question about does teaching help? Teaching does help, especially depending on what you teach. It definitely helped with MCAT studying, and now doing the pre-matriculation program at my school, there are definitely some topics that are popping up that I've been teaching. So it is helpful.
Wonderful. I just want to give a huge thank you. I am so appreciative of our panelists, my moderator. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for spending a little over an hour with us to share your experiences. There have been people watching on YouTube and tons of people who are going to be DMing me talking about, was it recorded? Can I watch it tomorrow? So people are going to be seeing this even in the next couple of days and weeks. Thank you guys so much. Everyone, their Instagram names are in their name right now, but if all my panelists could just go in and put your contact information, so if students want to chat with you more about your experience or have specific questions for you, they can connect with you guys on social media. Next week, what are we doing next week? Hold on, I have to bring up my schedule because the girls is doing a lot of things, so I'd be forgetting, but I'm really excited for the next couple of weeks because we have some really good sessions. Next week, I'm really excited. It's going to be the non-traditional accepted students panel. So we're going to be hearing from some real non-traditional students, people with low GPA, people who took like 5+ gap years. I'm really excited about that. And you're going to hear about their journeys to medicine and how there is no one way to get into medical school or to get into the field of medicine. And then after that is going to be a preparing for virtual interviews session where you guys can start learning about how people's experience with the first virtual interview for medical school happened, because I can imagine some schools will probably still continue that this year. So stay tuned for those sessions next week. And then the week after that, we have my favorite week because we're going to have the Deans of Admission panel. And I got a nice lineup for you guys for that, as well as securing the bag because we are getting medical school funded. Okay. So I will see you guys next week. As usual, follow me on Instagram, keep up with me, and definitely connect with our panelists. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you guys next week.